Uh, Thank you to the organizers for inviting me. Due to the shortage of time, I would briefly talk about these aspects. Environmental crisis, as we know, is uh, is a challenge that we are facing. And because of COVID-19, we are seeing that some of the progress that we made on SDGs, it has got reversed. And then I would talk a little bit more, you could say, uh, in a deep way about limitations of neoclassical economics to integrate ethics, and due to which we need uh, Islamic environmental ethics, which can provide us solutions. And we have also heard about the financial solutions in Islamic social finance from Professor Irfan. We have also looked at what are the environmental ethics that we find in the Quran and Hadith from Professor Rafiqul and also from Brother Saifullah. So let me start with what are the environmental challenges that we are facing. We know that we are having unprecedented burning of fossil fuels, rapid deforestation, contamination of seas, and this has resulted in rise in temperature, frequent heat waves, floods, melting of glaciers, and all these problems are there which we are facing. Now, if you look at the COVID-19 situation and the resulting challenges from the COVID-19 related to sustainable development, we see that there is increased poverty, which has reversed the gains that we have made on SDG 1, which is to reduce poverty. There is rise in hunger, there is rise in deaths related to COVID and also related to other diseases, because the resources that we have now are being mobilized and allocated on different types of challenges, and not just on particular health challenges that we were facing before COVID-19. There is schooling problem for children, increased unemployment, especially in the informal sector. There is decline in industrial growth in a lot of developing countries. Large corporations have survived, but micro enterprises, small enterprises, medium enterprises have really suffered. And we are also seeing that the wastage and the use of finite resources is also intensified due to COVID-19. There is more use of packing material, more nuclear travel, and law and order situation has also deteriorated. Now, if we look at the neoclassical economics theory as well as the solutions toolbox, we find that it is quite shallow. Neoclassical economics is a discipline devoid of values and ethics. It is unable to integrate ethics into the economic behavior. There is over reliance on Pareto efficiency when the policy making is deliberated upon. An efficient but highly unequal allocation is considered Pareto optimal. But if there is a Pareto improvement outcome, which is more egalitarian but not efficient, it would be considered as suboptimal. We know that there is a high concentration of resources. The resources are mobilized and used for inessential needs. Like there are some movies, some video games, they have budgets which exceed the planning and development budget of several countries in Africa and in the poorer regions of the world. If you look at neoclassical economics, it is neutral between ends. If there is a good commercial business uh, to make golf courses, to make resorts, then these projects are going to be carried out. And if there is sanitation problem, health problem, educational problem, this would be underfunded in a market economy. There is exploitation of natural environment. Whereas if we look at the Islamic economic framework, it asks human beings to be guardians of the natural environment for future generations. If we look at the current scenario, there is excessive consumption which is led by the fiat-based money system. There is credit expansion. Even in countries where the per capita income is very high, still we see that there is high household debt. The household debt per capita is also very high in countries where there is high per capita income. So this is the result of interest-based fractional reserve system in which there is fiat money. The fiat money is replacing the natural resources which are finite, which have intrinsic value, and we are not able to mobilize enough resources for development in this interest-based fractional reserve system. There is free riding on natural resources because these are not allocated and utilized through the market forces. They are beyond market resources, and there is a over exploitation of common property resources as well. What is needed is preservation, conservation, and restraint, and all of this requires environmental ethics. But sadly, the neoclassical economics is not able to integrate ethics into the economic behavior and also in policy making. Natural resources and elements of ecology have a different lifespan than the private owners. So some natural resources would have lives spread over centuries, but human being only has 60 to 80 years of lifespan. So what happens in self-centric paradigm is that there is tendency to overuse long-lived natural resources in one's lifetime alone. So what we are doing is we are borrowing from the future generations rather than giving them something. The mainstream neoclassical consumer theory overemphasizes the role of consumer sovereignty. So consumer is sovereign. Consumer can ask for anything, and the producers would be allocating resources to produce those golf courses and resorts, no matter whether there is urgent need for food and health somewhere else. So private property rights in an individualistic, self-interested paradigm grants limitless ownership without taking into account the responsibilities towards society and humanity. So all of this has resulted in ethical neutrality between contrasting ends, and there is an agency conflict between current and future generations in a godless worldview. Because if we think that there is no accountability mechanism, then present generation does not feel accountable to future generations. So this creates a wedge between market and social cost of environmental goods and resources, because social costs are not incorporated in the price mechanism. That is why these costs are ignored and we overuse natural resources. There is overexploitation of common property resources. There is free riding on public goods, and all of this creates intergenerational inequity in resource distribution. If you look at Islamic worldview, and Professor Rafiqul Islam has elaborated on it, so I would not go too much into detail. So Islamic worldview extends the responsibility of humans to society and future generations and other living species. Islamic worldview regards humans as trustees. It asks for afterlife accountability, which deeply influences preferences, behavior, and choices. It equips the believers with spiritual rationality to act in ethical ways for the eternal bliss. So Islamic economics incorporates ethical values. It is not devoid of values. The ethical values in Islamic economics are also more comprehensive, as we see. Islamic economics also brings a long-term perspective to the decision making by individuals, and it gives them more goals rather than just pursuit of self-interest. So Islamic ethics inculcates biasness, kindness, cooperation, and all of these traits are really important to foster ethical behavior. Islam guides explicitly in some cases to avoid extravagance, wasting, and lavishness, as we have also heard from other speakers through the Quranic verses and Hadith. Islam also provides such meaningful conditioning which can create right balance between human aspirations, which are having a limited wants, and the physical limits that we have in this world. Now, if we look at the externalities, these are the social costs which are not incorporated in the price mechanism, and that is why the environmental resources are not really valued as much as they should be, and they are overused, and we do not care too much about it because we are living in the current generation, but the future generations are going to suffer from it. So we need environmental ethics to make ourselves more responsible, not only to the current generation but also to the future generations. And for this, Islamic worldview has afterlife accountability, which can mitigate the agency conflict. If we just browse across Quranic verses and ahadith on environmental sustainability, we come across ahadith which incorporate social cost in private actions. Islam says that a Muslim has to care about what he or she is liking about the other person, just like he would care about himself. And Islam completely disallows wasting resources for other than the purpose of need. And if someone does that, if someone cuts trees without justification, there is a punishment for that. And we also come across hadith which promise private rewards to socially desirable actions. Like we have heard from Professor Rafiqul Islam that there is a strong encouragement for planting trees, and it is regarded as a highly virtuous act. If you look at other hadith, they emphasize on using resources, utilizing resources, and not keeping resources idle. In fact, Islamic jurisprudence says that if a resource is in the ownership of someone who is not making it productive and not making it use, then it should be given to others so that they can utilize it. If we look at encouragement for greening the economy, greening the society, we come across a lot of hadith which have also been mentioned by other speakers. I would skip them. And we also see a strong encouragement to act in good ways, no matter whether they have a material impact or not. Because for us, it is very important. For our own salvage, it is very important. If we would act in good ways, it would benefit us in afterlife. So then we do not have to worry about whether our small acts are going to make a difference or not. Not only the good acts would make a difference, but also the bad acts or the evil acts of hurting the economy would also make a difference, and this would be we would be responsible for these acts. Removing harmful things from the road is an act of charity. So Professor Rafiqul Islam has also mentioned about cleanliness, and cleanliness is not just with regards to making yourself clean, keeping yourself clean, but also keeping the environment clean and keeping the surroundings clean as well. And there is insurance of absolute justice, which reduces the agency conflict. So Islam says that whatever act that we would perform in this world, we would be accountable for it. So this reduces the agency conflict that we see in the neoclassical paradigm, in which there is a godless worldview, and people are not responsible beyond law. So if we have this worldview which makes human beings responsible and put the resources into their hands as trust, then as trustees we are basically going to be more responsible as compared to feeling ourselves like a sovereign consumer. There is a lot of literature in Hadith and in Quran which talks about protection of biodiversity, animal rights. So there are lots of Hadith which talk about animal rights, and there are also hadith which talk about conservation of resources, and there is emphasis on absolute conservation of resources, no matter whether they are abundant currently. So one implication is that maybe in the current generation we might feel like we would not run out of some of the natural resources, but if we take the future generations into account, we would not find that the resources are as much abundant as they are for us. So what is important is that we need to conserve the resources, which is really important. Lastly, I would talk about some principles which protect special regions like forests, like regions where animals are there. So Islamic principles say that these regions where there are, let's say, species which need to be protected, there is a region where animals are there. So these regions cannot be commercialized, they cannot be overused. So there is regulation for common property resources and public goods as well in Islam, which is not the case in market economy, where only the private property rights within the market economic transactions are given more importance. So there is emphasis on conservation of natural resources, and there is absolute guidance on not wasting, because it's not just oneself which need to think about himself, but the future generations also need to be taken into account when we are utilizing the resources. So the resources might be abundant to us, but not to all the people who are going to come in the future. So if we have this habit of not overutilizing resources, definitely we would not be leaving very little for the future generations. So there is also a hadith on informing about value of natural resources. One hadith says that what if you do not have water? And there are lots of Quranic verses which emphasize on environmental resources, on things in the ecology, and all of these things are regarded as blessings of Allah. So the idea is that all of these things are taken for granted by human beings, but they are not. And science has shown that we live in this world in a very fine-tuned system. So which means that all of these resources are really important. And Islamic principles emphasize on fitra, they emphasize on preserving nature, and hurting the economy, hurting the ecology is definitely against it. My last point and last slide is about this one verse from Quran which says that we have to keep into this thing in mind, that the world and the resources that we are enjoying in this world may seem to be having no consciousness, but they would have consciousness on the day of judgment, when the earth is shaking with a violent shaking, and the earth throws out her burdens, and man says, what has befallen her? On that day, earth shall tell her story. So we need to take into account this guideline that we have to be responsible, and all of these environmental ethics and teachings can govern economic behavior, keeping into account ethics. Thank you, Brother Khalid and other speakers, for listening.
Thank you very much, our brother, Dr. Salman Ahmed, who has joined from all through Pakistan. And he, of course, presented a very insightful presentation on Islam and environmental sustainability.